All right, welcome to the Detroit Lions News. I'm your host, Joe, and then this is the other host, James. And we are coming live after the Brad Holmes press conference. And he was very, how do you want to say it? Very, he pointed the finger right at him. I know there's going to be a lot of people that are they're going to take the edge rusher thing for what not what it is, especially if you were listening to Nice. I won't ticket, whatever. Um,
I didn't even hear them. Did they hate it, by the way? Did
Oh,
Mike
they hated it.
Gianni hate
Yeah,
what he
and
had to
and they
say?
had the ticket text or whatever, and they were just going, "What the hell?"
Ah,
We'll explain why it makes sense. We'll explain. And then the second thing is, obviously there's obviously some huge news that came out before the press conference that Mike McDaniel, who let's just put it directly and bluntly, is probably one of the best play callers you can get for the Detroit Lions. So that's number two. And then number three, we'll talk about everything else with this team, but there's a lot of things to get to. We'll talk about free agents that are on the lines, and we'll talk about offensive needs, defensive, what they need. And then as we go through the offseason, we'll talk about each positional group, kind of like grade them out, you know what I'm saying? But for this one, Brett Holmes spoke today, and it was interesting, James, because everything he said kind of echoed what Dan Campbell was saying. I loved what he said about, the failure starts with me and that there is things that he could do better. I wanted to hear what you kind of thought about this whole this press conference because I came away thinking a lot of stuff was good. Now the Monty thing, I'm not really happy about, but maybe they do work something out because he wanted to talk to Monty about it. But obviously, we know the price tag of Dave Montgomery's deal, so that stands right there. So, what did you think?
yeah. I mean, I'm always the person that's like press conferences. I try not to really like read into every single word. I think these guys and Brad Holmes even today was like, "Oh, I don't really want to give away too much," or "Oh, I still need to review the year and before I give my full opinion." But this is probably the one press conference that maybe there's an exception to that in a lot of ways, and I still think he did say some interesting things. I mean, you touched on the Montgomery one there. That one certainly stood out as it's something that was at least interesting. I mean, he could have been like, no, like David Montgomery is like a heart and soul guy. Like we know he didn't get his touches, but he's under contract and we're fully committed to him. Like he didn't. He was like the total opposite. I mean, it was like, I mean, it probably was like everyone was kind of struck in by. I was like, oh wow, like okay, maybe they will entertain trading him. But I'm with you too. I'm like, if we get rid of him, it's like to me that's just another need we now need, and like he's probably near the top of the list in terms of complimentary guys I would want, but maybe that's for another show. But yeah, he did, there was that part of it. I did think the Frank Ragnow part where he officially said it was, I think he even gave said May or whatever month he gave, but said after the draft with Frank Ragnow. And he acknowledged obviously there were breadcrumbs or whatever the terminology used. But
Yeah, breadcrumbs. Yeah,
yeah, ultimately, when you don't know, I put this on my account. It's like I get it. Like you want to have a contingency, and he even echoed kind of what I said. It's like we kind of baked in that we were already kind of moving towards a youth movement, and there's going to be some growing pains with some of these guys. Like he pointed out, he likes Tate Ratledge. Um, but there's also the side of it where it's like, we just had a Hall of Fame center retire, and yes, we were kind of gonna have to wait it out with them. And what are we gonna do? Sign a sign a starter when we still think there's a chance Frank Ragnow might play. So I think that having the timeline of that was interesting. And then another thing that was kind of, and maybe I'm reading a little bit too much into it, but when he was talking about the 2025 draft, to me, it kind of made it seem like they wanted to trade up for an edge rusher, is what it came off to me. I'd have to go back and get the exact quote on that, but Brad Holmes was talking about the draft, and he's like, basically kind of whatever the word is, kind of projected out that maybe, yeah, and he kind of did this a lot, and maybe that's another thing people didn't like, that he talked a lot about how there were a lot of deals that didn't happen that he understands you can only talk about the ones that do happen, but there's a lot of stuff behind the scenes that people obviously don't get to know of because, basically those things only come to light when an actual trade or acquisition happens. And he made a reference of that in the first round where, because he was talking about edge rushers and he was like, well, in the draft, blah blah blah, and if this would have worked out, we would have liked to get one. Obviously that's not exactly what he said, but I really thought he was talking about they tried to trade up for an edge in the first round. So those were kind of the big three things I took out of it. But in general, I mean, he called this season a failure. He said that he needs to look inward. They talked about top to bottom, and they need to look to see what they can do to get better. And I didn't. It was certainly a way different tone. At minimum, if you're someone that just was still upset with Brad Holmes, it was a like night and day tone to the 2023 one, where he kind of came out with almost like a already written down statement of bullet points he wanted to address. He was kind of like, you could definitely tell he was kind of downtrodden, and like they view this season as, I think he even said, up to their standards, it was a failure. So for a press conference, make of it what you will, but I think all in all it was decent.
Well, what's interesting is like there was a story that I heard from someone that I know, and he was kind of in the know about the whole situation, but he was saying, and I didn't want to bring it to air, but obviously, Brett Holmes said this. He literally said that it's not for a lack of effort for trying to make moves. So I heard this right around the trade deadline. After the trade deadline, Jalen Phillips got traded to the Eagles on Sunday night. This is what I was told by the person, and it was someone that was had connections. But he said, and I didn't believe it, but now I believe it because Brett Holmes just confirmed it. But he said they were trying to figure out if they were going to activate Josh Pascal off IR. Like they thought Josh Pascal was going to be able to come back, and that's why they were like, let's wait it out a day. Well, it turns out Howie Roseman made that deal that night, and basically undercut Brad Holmes. And that's kind of like the lack of effort thing. Like if you try and you're trying and you're trying to see what kind of things that you could do. Sure, he could have made the deal and then thought about it later, but that's probably the things that he kind of thinks about. But in the moment, you're probably like, let me see if this can happen. Let me see if what's this going to happen. There's other roster spots that they were looking to, Kirby Joseph at that time was dealing with an injury. They had injuries other places with Terrion Arnold and DJ Reed. So you can't take all the guys off IR. I don't know how many you're selected to have. I think it's 5 or 6 or whatever that you could take off IR. But when I heard that story, and then I was like, all right, whatever. I don't really believe it. I'll never take it to the podcast. But when Brad Holmes said, today about the lack of effort in terms of, they tried to do some things, but obviously nothing came to fruition. That came to my mind. And obviously what you talk about with the draft, how, the draft was like something that, they could have went up and got someone like a guy like, there was guys that they could have got like James Pierce and all that jazz. But I think that there was someone that they wanted to get up and they just couldn't get up enough to go get. And that's part of the reason. And it just goes to show you that he's made mistakes. We're all aware that he's made some mistakes, but the reality of the situation is I think they did the best with whatever way that they could. And like the Frank Ragnow thing, I think we were all aware that he stepped away after the draft. And I don't really think that Brad Holmes and Dan Campbell were like, oh, we're shocked. But I don't think they were thinking like, let's go get a center like Drew Dahlman at the Bears got, because what if he does come back? You never know. So it's kind of like a if this, if that. And you're right about the youth movement. They were going to go into a youth movement regardless. I mean, Zeitler coming back would have been great, but that doesn't fix your whole situation. Eventually, you were going to go into a youth movement. Now, I wonder what he learned from this year going into next year, potentially what you're going to do if Taylor Decker hangs it up. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, and that's kind of where I'm at with this press conference in general, because it's he could have said like the most perfect answers for everything. Ultimately, like we're gonna have to see what happens this offseason. And I do kind of take it as at least from and we'll have to see if this pans out as being right or not. The offseason will tell us. But I do kind of view it as their hands were tied a little bit with the Taylor Decker thing. They were probably going to draft the offensive lineman early, regardless. Taylor Decker is going to be a big factor into this. I still hope he comes back for another year. If he doesn't, now that's another premium piece. Rather, if you move Panay over there or not, you still have a starting tackle spot you need to fill. But I do think they're going to kind of view offensive line as a serious position that they need to upgrade this year. And if that's through trade or through the draft to bolster it or in free agency as well, I do think they're going to view that as okay, no, like we need to attack this seriously and probably get even more than we need for the offensive line. When it comes to the defensive line, I think that's where people will be upset. I think he did kind of say we're going to do the same approach, which I don't necessarily think that's bad per se in terms of they have guys like Pascal and Levi Onwuzurike and Davenport and Muhammad, who was the one guy that really performed. Now, those guys probably the one guy there that you want back is Muhammad. The others you probably don't. But I don't really think they basically have those roster spots now available. Like go out and actually make that move and get an edge in the first round, and
Yeah.
like go out and either re-sign Muhammad, like go out, re-sign Muhammad, and then get another like Muhammad type or better guy in free agency or whatever. I don't think that approach is bad. You just got to do a way better. You can't go 1 for 4 or 1 for 5 or whatever they did. And ultimately we almost pulled this off or didn't thing. I always think that just falls on deaf ears ultimately, like especially when the season doesn't pan out. So they're just going to be judged on if they like do good and like it works. Like I don't no one really wants to hear that. It's honestly though it is like for me it is nice to hear that they are trying behind the scenes, and maybe it is hollow that they didn't get whatever move some fan wants, but just in terms of the off season, like they're going to have to go out and actually finish or get right whatever those moves are, because the offensive and defensive lines weren't good enough this year, and those are to me those are the points of emphasis going into the offseason.
Yeah, I think the points of emphasis you just said are going to be the defensive line, and I really don't think it was the pass rush that was ultimately the issue. You got two guys who are in the top 10 of sacks in the entire NFL. I mean, we always talk about trading for Max Crosby. Me and you have talked about it too on the podcast, and Al Qadim Muhammad had more sacks than Max Crosby. I mean, it just is what it is. So here's the
I'll still
reality.
take Max Crosby though, but yeah, I get your point.
Yeah, we're not seeing Max
Yeah,
Crosby's
yeah,
not,
yeah.
whatever. But I'm just saying, it did work. But the reality of the situation was like Jeff Risdon has hit on this a bunch of times, and I think he's correct on this. And I give him full marks. And I think this is something I've said too, and I think you said too. The issue isn't with a big time pass rusher like a Max Crosby or Miles Garrett or whatever. You got Hutch, right? I think the issue with the pass rush in terms of the Detroit Lions is the ultimate depth. Like how much depth do you got? And when you're relying on guys like Marcus Davenport, who is a paper clip away from being on IR, Pascal, he's a step away from falling down the stairs. And then Levi Onwuzurike, I
I
mean,
mean, they got literally nothing basically from those three guys that you just named.
yeah, and I think you come into it, you're like, okay, they can't be injured again. I think Davenport was someone who was gonna require a little bit of time. But Pascal was like, they thought good, they had some good right there. Onwuzurike got hurt in training camp. I mean, these things he kind of put himself into this situation because he went with the guy like Levi. He went with the guy like
Yeah,
Pascal. And that's where you're ultimately judged. You know what I'm saying? And
yeah.
I know people don't want to hear if you got this guy, you got this guy. It doesn't work that way. It's how do you go about things? It's kind of like hockey example real quick because I do a hockey podcast, regular podcast, but it's kind of like when Steve Eiserman goes and he says, "I don't want Gothisbehere anymore," and he goes, "I'm gonna go get Gustafsson." Well, that sucks because Gothisbehere is a damn good defenseman, especially on the power play and all that. But he got lucked out by Axel Sandin Pellikka and Simon Edvinsson. That's where he got lucked out. So kind of a similar situation with what Brad Holmes is dealing with. Like you got to have luck to deal with it. You know what I'm saying?
And honestly, that's a you kind of naturally led me to another point there, and another thing people might not like, but I ultimately think needs to be the core of this team is, and Brad Holmes said it, like it's not the people necessarily the players on this team's fault. It's they need to get more of them to supplement the roster, and I think he said exactly that. Like they need to draft more impact. Maybe that is his way of saying he needs to draft less development projects. But then he did kind of say when asked that, he's like, I'm not necessarily not going to do that. I'm going to pick the right guy. But I do think there's an element of they need to, like, I don't think this roster is necessarily crazily flawed or there's spots that they need to address clearly. But they do kind of need to still stick to their roots and get back to, keep draft. And I think we probably have different opinions on this last draft opinion than most people. Like, I think when you really look at the first three picks of Tyreek Williams, Tate Ratledge, and Isaac Tesla, that's going to, even this year, I think it was, decent, but I think it is going to end up being more of an objective win in the public's eyes as the years go on. So, I guess more to that point of they need to, hit on this year's draft class and, get 3-4 more guys that can add to this while you have these other guys developing. And maybe, the 2024 draft class becomes, less of a, oh my gosh, what a disaster if Terry and Arnold can stay on the field for a full year and, Rakestraw gives them literally anything. And, going down the line, maybe Vaki stays healthy too, because I think he's actually, for where he was picked, in the 4th round, like he's actually actually a very good special teams player. It just seems like he was hurt every other game. So, the injury thing still is frustrating. They didn't, Dan Campbell or Brad Holmes haven't used it as an excuse at all. But it is annoying. And if they can have a year where they're even just mildly healthy, I do think that could cure some issues, maybe not all of them, but maybe there are, 6 things that pop up that are issues during a year. Maybe if you're not the most injured or second most injured team in the league, only 3 of them pop up or only 4 of them pop up. Like it has been brutal that they've been, a top, probably the most injured team last year. And then this year, I think the 49ers were more injured. If you want to throw in maybe 1 or 2 more teams, okay. But like the injuries have been definitely a realistic factor in their last 2 seasons.
Yeah, I look at their last 2 draft classes, and I think I would venture a guess that I think that there's going to be 4 picks from last year's draft that are going to be really good. I think Miles Frazier could be pretty decent. But you look at 2024. I mean, Reichstrahl has been a disappointment. He can't stay on the field. Banu has, even Holmes admitted today, he's not where he's expected to be, and he's going to have to compete for a spot. Baki is a great special teams player, but he can't stay healthy. Wingo was a walking healthy scratch every game, pretty much.
He randomly did, I thought, pretty good against the Bears, which was I thought like one of the most random things of the entire. But I mean,
that whole game was
there, but
that whole game was just random in every sense of the imagination.
Stupid.
It was like Kelvin Shepard went to zone defense. You're like, where was this, dude? Like, where was this? Like 3 weeks ago, 4 weeks ago. It just don't make any sense. And I think I could deal with injuries. Like I was talking to someone who does a 49ers podcast, and he said the difference between the Lions and the 49ers, and this is actually true too. He goes, let me ask you a question. Would you want to lose Hutch and would you want to lose Campbell? I said, not really. He says, if those are your biggest 2 injuries, would you take that? and the rest of it be like spread out. You know what I'm saying? I was like, okay, that kind of makes sense. He goes, that's kind of what we dealt with. Okay. But you guys, in terms of like the Lions, you guys dealt with, oh, your secondary is just effed. Like you lose DJ Reed, you lose Terry Arnold, you lose Kirby Joseph, you lose Brian Branch. Oh, then you lose Sam Laporta. Like,
Yeah, I think losing both tight ends and Mahogany was pretty on top of what you just said. Yeah.
yeah, and then you lose Brock Wright, and you're like, all right, so we're down to what? Our third tight end, Ross Dwelly. Like,
The tight end situation got really crazy fast.
and you that doesn't happen. Like, even he was saying, like, the 49ers, we had a wide receiver injury here, right? We had a linebacker injury here. We had a defensive end injury here. We had another cornerback go down. He goes, your guys just died in the secondary. Dead, dead, dead. It's like, wait, it does make sense. Like, and I just thought that was the way I was looking at it. Like, if it's more spread out, maybe we can maintain it. But when you lose Branch and you lose Joseph and you lose Arnold and then you lose two tight ends, it's like, how far can you go on those injuries? Like, next man up only means
Really, I
some.
mean, to our point with Brad Holmes, like the defensive line too, like Pascal, Davenport, and Anzarike, like you out of those three guys, you basically got like a half year out of Davenport, and that's it. Like, so I mean, if it's the GM's fault or not, like, you probably could say from the defensive line standpoint, it probably was because like Davenport came in with that was the whole thing. It was just okay, like, and you like, and on this year, we probably gave him like as fans, as an entire fan base, like we probably gave Davenport more credit than he deserved. Like I feel like people kind of were like, oh, if he can just when he's on the field, he's actually decent. It's just he gets hurt all the time. Well, he ultimately still got hurt for half the season, but then when he did play the last half of the season, he just was a total non-factor. But you knew that the injuries could be a very real thing with him. And then, I don't hate re-signing Anzarike, but like that was like a guy that was going to be a legitimate, like a de facto starter essentially. And you knew that he battled injuries. Basically could only give you one good year up until that point, and then he goes down. And then, same thing with Pascal. I guess you're not, he's under contract, but, he was a guy that was going to play a good amount and he got injured for the however most time in a row. So, he did talk about, Brad Holmes did mention like a lot today, really. I mean, whether they do any of it again is kind of my point of now we're going to have to see ultimately what happens and then analyze it from there. But they talked about some structural changes on both sides of the ball. If not that they do it, but just that they're going to have to look at everything on a year like this. So we'll see what comes of it. But there's certainly, at least from the defensive line, like, do they kind of look at it now as, let's make sure we get that, first round deal done that I alluded to, that I think he, go back and watch that press conference when he's talking about the draft. I think he's alluding to they liked an edge in the first round. So, do they go out and get an edge in the first or second round this year? Do they make it a more serious point to, instead of it, the, penciled in starter opposite of Hutch being Marcus Davenport, is a guy that, played 14 games this past year and had 6 or 7 sacks. Like, whoever that is, if it's a trade or free agency or whoever. So, they're going to have the opportunity to, because those guys are all on the defensive line, like they're gone. It's not guys that you're going to be cutting or whatever. Like Marcus Davenport's not going to be here unless you, for some reason, sign him again.
Yeah, I think it's going to be interesting. And here's what Brad Holmes said about not being so far off. I'll play it right now. Let me get it full screen. But where is it? Oh, right there.
Season change. You're just a big picture view of how close or far you think you are from it.
I don't think that we're that far off. I personally don't. We have a lot of good players. We have a lot of good young ascending players. We have a really good quarterback. We have the right coach. I do think that we're very close. And hey, look, maybe that is some of the things that, maybe that's one of the items that needs to be looked back on, is thinking that you are so close. And so then now you start changing some things because you only need this piece. You only need that piece. And you got to feel, and it's like, no, like, who's the best player to fit for what we're trying to do that has gotten us to have the expectations that we have as a football team right now. So again, we'll be looking at everything, but I do not think that this is a deep surgery overhaul. Like, I don't think that, but obviously there needs to be some adjustments made for sure.
So you heard him right there, and you say, okay. When you hear that, you go, okay, I agree with that 100%. It doesn't need a deep overhaul. You're not like 12 players away. You're like maybe what, 3, 4, 5, something like that. And you can get those guys in the off season, and it's not like they were a terrible team, because they really weren't. They were actually pretty decent for the most part, but the reality of the situation is not decent enough, and I look at it like, we've said this multiple times in multiple different ways, it feels like, but they're not far away. They need to have a good off season. It starts with, hiring the right offensive coordinator. I think that's what really skewed things in a wrong direction, because once Dan took over offensive play calling, it seemed like the team kind of, for whatever reason, was less focused on, like, he couldn't go talk to the defense about this or that. He kind of had to stick with the offense and left Shepard alone. And when Shepard, had issues, like, I remember when Aaron Glenn had issues with a certain scheme or whatever. I think it was against Philadelphia or whatever. Dan Campbell came over there and showed him, like, this is what we need to do. This is what we need to do. And they came back in the game. So I look at this situation where that wasn't able to happen. And then you have what happened with Morgan getting fired. Offense looked better under Campbell, but the reality of the situation is, Campbell is a better CEO than he is like a play caller, in my opinion. And that's not a bad thing. But if you have a young defensive coordinator or a young offensive coordinator, usually you want to be able to insulate them, right? So having a veteran OC like Mike McDaniel would be absolutely huge for Detroit. We talked about this before the podcast. I think this would change a lot of things for the Detroit Lions, especially what you said about on the run games portion. I'll let you speak to that. But just having the ability to have a guy who's an advanced play caller, who's been a head coach, who can lead the charge on the offense, who, let's be honest, he had a statue as a quarterback in Tua Tagovailoa because he couldn't run, or else he was going to get concussed for the 18,000th time. And that offensive line stunk in Miami, and he designed a great run game for them. And not only that, but look what he did with Tyreek Hill. And I look at Jameson Williams and I go, that's a younger version of Tyreek Hill. And if Tyreek Hill was able to have the success that he had with Mike McDaniel, what does a younger Jameson Williams do for his offense? And I look at Jalen Waddle and St. Brown and I go, okay, cool. Kind of similar player. They're not similar in the way that they play, but they're similar in the way that they, catch the ball. They're good players. They're reliable players. The one thing that Mike McDaniel never had in Miami is a tight end. Never had a tight end. Sam Laporte is your tight end. He never had an offensive line. I mean, you started an offensive line with Penei Sewell. Pretty good. Most of the league doesn't have a Sewell. I mean, you look at some of these teams in the playoffs right now, they would chop off their right arm for a Sewell. So that's where I stand. I don't know where you stand, but I know you have a specific way you want to go about this.
Yeah, I mean, as I told you, I'm kind of mad at myself that I'm so attached to this, at least having the chance to happen, because I tweeted at the midway point of the season when it kind of looked like it was inevitable that Mike McDaniel was going to be fired, that I would be incredibly interested as him as offensive coordinator of the Lions. I tweeted about it a bunch of times since, even today, before this news broke. So I was kind of even extra excited about it. But I just think this is a perfect I really think it's perfect all the way around. I think from Mike McDaniel's standpoint, I get people could say, "Oh, he could be a head coach." I really think someone like him that's already spent now several years as a head coach, wouldn't he want the priority to be like get a great situation? So I mean, yeah, if he gets hired by one of these teams and he thinks there's some great pathway to be, successful as a head coach, by all means, go for it. But I really think if he comes and is the offensive coordinator of the Lions in a situation where he doesn't have, like, kind of the knock on him is he just isn't quite ready or built out to be a head coach. He can't have the whole team buttoned up, that sort of thing. If he can just focus on like dealing with Jameer Gibbs and Jamison Williams and St. Brown and Goff and like I think it's a perfect situation for him. He can come here even on a year like this for the Lions, where they had they have all these issues with the offensive line and play calling and all of that. They still ranked 4th in scoring. They were number 1 for a majority of the year. It kind of is a built-in super high floor for him where they're going to score 28, probably 38 or 28, 30 points a game with him as the head coach. I mean, they were gotten to 30s with Ben Johnson. I think they're at like 28.3 this year.
Yep.
Instead of forcing it with, oh, I need to go be the head coach of the Raiders or the Titans or the Cardinals, where quite honestly, like if he goes somewhere and it doesn't work out, now you're in a spot where you're kind of damaged goods at that point. Now you probably aren't going to get rehired by someone. Like if he takes another head coaching job this cycle, he needs it to pan out and be a success, or else, you kind of lose your mulligans at that point. If you come to Detroit and you're probably going to be viewed as a success just because this offense is great. You can put your touch on it and kind of get it back over the hump. And now you're viewed as, that great offensive mind that you are. And now you don't have to take the Raiders job. You can take, whatever, job comes up in the next year or two that you can more hand select and not be forced to take a crappy job just because you want a head coaching job. So, from a stylistic standpoint, like you said, the run game side of it, I really think is the number one thing. I mean, especially with this Lions team. I mean, this was a Miami team that wasn't even good and rushed for more yards per game than the Lions, Packers, Eagles, and Broncos. You mentioned all the things he hasn't had. I would say too, like Jared Goff would be a significant upgrade to what he's had at quarterback there. It's a similar style of offense in that they want to attack the middle of the field. They don't have a mobile quarterback. All around, I think it's a perfect fit. And I do think he's the number 1 offensive mind available right now.
Yeah, I think here's the way I look at it. I look at it two ways. If I'm Mike McDaniel, why do I want to come to Detroit? I would go, well, here's the reason I want to come to Detroit. I get to rebuild my image as a play caller.
Exactly. That's really the number 1 thing.
And number 2, next time around, the next go around, I have my pick of the litter, right? Like you might be limited this time around with picking a job like Arizona or Vegas or someone like that, right? You're not limited right now. You know what I'm saying? Like you're kind of limited right now. So I would take it as, look, I'm not going to have a chance to go get the Giants job. I'm not going to have a chance to go get the Ravens job. Those are 2 of the jobs that probably are the most coveted. Maybe the Titans if you want to put together a little bit, but those are the 3 jobs I think that stand alone. You're not going to Cleveland. Cleveland sucks. The GM sucks. The ownership, they suck too. You're not going to go to Vegas because Vegas has had a basically a turnstile of people go through that door. I mean, I think they have like $167 million in contract buyouts, whatever. Arizona, cheap owner. Not many players are going to go, I want to go play in Arizona. And who's going to be your quarterback? Are you going to have Kyler Murray? You know what I'm saying? Like, I think Arizona is a rebuild. I think Vegas is a rebuild. I think Cleveland is a rebuild, even though you got Myles Garrett on the other side. That offense sucks. You don't have a quarterback. So go where the quarterback is. And if I'm the Lions, here's what I would do. I would just say to Mike McDaniel, if I was advising him, you have the perfect football situation to come in here, right? You have elite players, a weak schedule. You're playing 9 games at home. You're going to play 1 in Europe, so whatever. You're going to have 12 games in a dome and 2 in warm weather. So 14 games are going to be right up your alley. Okay, 14 games. It means 3 games are going to be outside Chicago, Green Bay, and I forget the last one. I forget the one that's not going
Panthers will be outside, but that could
Panthers,
be
but that's a warm weather. So okay,
Miami.
whatever.
We play at Miami. That could be warm. That's
And then
warm
you could
weather.
go stick it to Miami on the other side.
That would
So
be great. That would be great.
so if I'm Mike McDaniel, I know I'm not probably going to go back to San Francisco, but I can go to Dan Campbell, and I can learn off Dan Campbell, and Dan Campbell can come in here and basically say, "Look, this is the way I run my team." And part of the reason that Mike McDaniel really didn't catch on with Miami is because the team was soft. Now, if you're looking to get a doctorate
exactly.
and trying to become like what you were missing, you come to Detroit, you learn off Dan Campbell, you learn the grit factor, and you go, okay, I could do this. Because I look at Ben Johnson in
100%.
Chicago. I look at Ben Johnson in Chicago and I go, okay, that team has grit. I don't care. I don't like the team. I think they're frauds, but they play with a certain personality like the coach. Aaron Glenn, I feel like that team's got some grit. I feel like they're also just a terrible team, a terrible organization. And I think that kind of Glenn's going to be in a bad situation no matter how you slice it. Even Stephen A. Smith is like, yeah, you don't want Dante Moore. If you have a chance to go to the Jets, just go back to college. I was like, geez. But if I'm Mike McDaniel, this is the best opportunity I have to get a doctorate, you know what I'm saying, in how to be a football coach. I mean, there's not many other places I could learn off of the whole grit factor and the whole hard nose. And I mean, you go be an offensive coordinator for maybe Mike Tomlin. Maybe that's the guy, but he has Arthur Smith. So there you go.
Yeah, I think that last point you brought up is such a great one because I've seen people point out like, oh, is it really a fit and blah, blah, blah. I really think it's the perfect fit. And the fact that it's already come out that the Lions are interested tells me that, Dan Campbell and Mike McDaniel are really smart coaches and realize that they could really benefit from each other. Because as you just said, from Mike McDaniel's point of view, that is the one thing that is like the sticking point with him is his teams are too soft. He can build a flashy offense, which you would have all the tools to do again in Detroit. But when he becomes a head coach again, is he going to be able to build more of a full encompassing team that has the qualities to play these games deep into the season? That's exactly what you would want to learn from Dan Campbell. And then from Dan Campbell's point of view, you're bringing in, for lack of a better way to put it, like another Ben Johnson type and a brilliant offensive mind, but someone now that already has a wealth of experience as a head coach and has been through a lot of success as a head coach and then a lot of failure as a head coach. I think that in general, bringing in a de facto another head coach into your organization, I think is always a great thing. And as I already said, the offensive stamp that he could put on this offense, like Dan Campbell isn't above having, he even said it with Ben Johnson, like by the end of it, he wanted to give the entire offense to Ben Johnson and not really have to worry about it. He can put in his input, but I really feel like every personality, like there's no way I don't get the whole, like, oh, he doesn't fit in here. Like, Kelvin Shepard had a quote, that I think hits it perfectly, and that you can be yourself in this organization. And I think that's one of the strengths of it. Like there's all sorts of different types of personality and different people as players and coaches on this staff. And, as long as you have the same goal in mind, I think you can succeed here. So, he's going to be super coveted. I'm sure there's, the teams that we just called out as basically jokes of franchises that will do everything they possibly can to get him as the head coach. I know, some of the national writers have pointed out, oh, he's best friends with Dan Quinn. He can be their offensive coordinator too, which, hey, maybe if he just, he loves Dan Quinn, maybe he just wants to go do that. So, it's not a set in stone thing by any means, but if man, if this is something that if it happens for me personally, it's like almost like makes the offseason type of thing, because this would be like a grand slam type hire, and they need to hit on this hire. So I mean, it's definitely at least exciting that they're already reaching out to him and have interest in it, especially for anyone that was all pissed off that they were interested in David Blau, which I think was definitely a worthwhile mind to pursue. Because here's the other thing that I'd say about this whole thing is it's not, yes, it's about you want to hire the right person for the job, but it's basically a free session to like ask people their opinion on your offense and your team. So why not like talk to whoever and get their input on the Lions offense and what they think needs to happen to make some of their deficiencies turn around. So like having talking to Mike McDaniel about the Lions offense, like to me that in itself is a win.
Yeah, I look at it like this. I don't know. Maybe you think about this, like, but you remember Nick Saban, and every coach that sucked at their last stop would go to Nick Saban as like it was like a passages Malibu for bad coaches. You go to Steve Sarkisian, boom. Lane Kiffin, boom. Brian Dable, boom. Like all these guys went there. If Dan Campbell was able to pull this off, and then what happens is, I think this would set up a avalanche of coaches coming to Dan Campbell saying, "I want to work with you." Let's imagine down the line, right? Kelvin Shepard gets a coaching job. He gets a head coaching job. You get a chance to pick your veteran defensive coordinator. Let's say Dan Quinn flames out in Washington, and you go, Danny Quinn, come on, boy, let's go. Then you got your Steve Spagnuolo on the defensive side, and then let's say down the line, Mike McDaniel takes a job. If he took it with Detroit, he takes a job somewhere, and let's say a guy like Kevin O'Connell gets fired. I mean, he probably would not, but just bear with me. Or maybe a guy like, Steve Steichen with the Indianapolis Colts. Maybe he gets fired, and you're like, all right, come on, let's go. We'll get you back to your job. It's kind of like the similar thing that the Patriots did all those years, where they ran these coaches back and they said, Josh McDaniels, absolute terrible coach, head coach, terrible coach, probably one of the worst coaches ever. He got multiple jobs. Okay, Matt Patricia, Charlie Weiss, Romeo Crennel with the Browns. I mean, you go down the line and you're like, damn, like anybody else gonna hire some gobbledygook? And that's exactly what they did. And I just look at it as this: there's no salary cap for coaches, so you can go out there and you can pay whatever the hell you want to pay if they want to write the check. That's what I think. So this is a chance for them, but I know that Mike McDaniel is going to get offers to be a head coach somewhere, and wherever he gets an offer from, I would just tell him, do you want to make your next job something like where you're going to a place where you're going to coach Arch Manning, or you're going to coach one of the premier quarterbacks, or do you want to go where you're going, I'm going to go to Vegas where they got Geno Smith, Kyler Murray, Cleveland, you want to coach Shadur Sanders? I mean, he looked all right, but he ain't no great shakes. I mean, there you go. Do you want to coach those guys, or do you want to wait your turn and go to the right situation? I think Dan Quinn of the Dallas Cowboys did it the right way. When he was with the Dallas Cowboys, he went to Dallas, he waited. Boom, commander's job opens. He goes to Washington, and he does what he does. I think it's about all where you go. I don't care about if you think you're better than that. Half these organizations that we've named, Cleveland, Vegas, they fire every coach that comes through the door. Arizona's cheap. There you go. Like, put your own perspective into it and just think about what you want.
Yeah, I mean, it'll be interesting because we're at the start of the cycle. I mean, I'm sure there'll be might even be another surprise opening or two once a playoff team gets eliminated. But and there's going to probably be more names that the Lions are interested in. I think there's some decent candidates out there, but I do think Mike McDaniel's one that like I would put the full court press on him and try to get him. But again, you know, maybe he does have interest in being a head coach. So we'll see. But it is exciting that they, you know, that they at least want him, and you know, we kind of just have to see what goes from here. And it was also interesting that they, you know, immediately fired John Morton, because it did seem like maybe, especially after his comments that he said he would basically like take a demotion, maybe he could fit as like a passing game coordinator or something. So that in itself was kind of noteworthy news that they already, you know, immediately moved on from him. And then since then, they've, you know, they have two names already in David Blau and Mike McDaniel that they've at least have reported interest in. So this will be a huge hire and a big factor, honestly, in next season. So I mean, it's definitely a big storyline to keep your eye on.
Yeah, and I think, well, here's the thing. Last thing I'll say on Mike McDaniel. Here's what I would say to him. I know Washington is a team that could potentially get him as offensive coordinator. Here's how I would take this. You're a run game guy, right? Do you want to soil yourself to Bill Merritt, you know, the running back from the Commanders, or do you want to have Jahmyr Gibbs? Do you want to, you know, if he came and he says, I will only stay if Dave Montgomery is going to stay. Oh, hell, Dave Montgomery is staying, and they're running those two over and over. I think it's, again, you know, it's the situation. Where is the best situation for you? And even Philadelphia fans are like, wait, if we get beat this week, the Eagles should do it.
Oh, they'd be all, yeah. They'll definitely have an OC opening, I think, for sure. Philadelphia.
If the Eagles lose, they'll do the same thing. They'll be like, screw it. And then, you know, if I'm Mike McDaniel, I'm like, okay, I got Detroit and Philadelphia. Who do I want to go to? That's kind of like the $1 million question. But, you know, Dan Campbell is going to teach that grit. The only thing I would say about the Eagles, if Mike McDaniel went there, I think Vic Fangio would beat his ass in the locker room. That's just my opinion. But that's the way it goes. So we look forward to these you know, this team, and you know, we look at the offense, and we heard Brad Holmes talk about the offensive line. Is it just the offensive line that needs to be better? What do you think needs to be better?
In terms of the offense, I mean, I have been someone that is, you know, while admitting there, you know, it's not the 2023 or 2024 Lions offense, I do think like just the talent on this team and the floor that is there because of that is pretty high. So I would say, yeah, it is just the offensive line for me in terms of what needs to improve. Yes, they're going to have a new play caller. I get that. But I do think the offensive line, you're looking at it as they're probably going to have a new center. I'll throw out the opinion. I do think Tate Ratledge is going to stay at right guard. They have a full year of him playing there already. If it was a situation where he played a bunch of center in college, I maybe would have a different viewpoint on it, but I just think that's tough in a year where you really want to improve the offensive line to throw a guy in there who basically has never played center in a game before. And I like him as a right guard, so I do think he'll play there. So they're going to have to upgrade center. Left guard to me will be the one that's interesting. I don't, they've talked about competition a lot. Dan Campbell brought that up as a big point when he talked the other day. Maybe that's a prime position to either, sign someone in free agency. Maybe it's not a locked in starter, but, someone like, 2 or 3 years ago with Graham Glasgow, where when they signed him, they were saying that Vaitai was still the starter. But they brought him in as a legitimate guy that could win a job. And he ultimately did win a starting job. So maybe it's a situation like that. Maybe it's a situation where they draft someone in the second, they trade and they get a 3rd round pick again, and they use it on an offensive lineman, and that guy wins the left guard job. We'll see. And then obviously I think a big part of this conversation is going to be, what does Taylor Decker do, which I really don't have a good read on one way or another. I don't think it's like I do think there has been this thing where it's like a given he's going to retire. I think it's more of a toss up. But that's going to be a big factor because if he retires, it is another a big piece that they got to figure out what they want to do at tackle.
Yeah, I look at it like this. I didn't think about anything else in the offensive line, to be honest. Because when I look at the offensive line, here's his signature stat, James, that you'll enjoy. The signature stat here is the Lions had 6 yards, 6 yards per play. So it's 6.0 yards per play. That was third best in the NFL. You take the top 15 teams, and you go, who had the most pressures out of all those teams in the top 15? There's only one that had more pressures than the Detroit Lions in the top 15. It was the New England Patriots. And I would say the New England Patriots kind of benefited from a schedule that was kind of better.
They really did. Of all teams to benefit from a schedule, it was the Patriots.
Yeah, and the Patriots, they're a good team. Drake May's good, but I look at this like this. He still had, in time to throw, he still had almost 3 seconds to throw. Jared Goff had 2.7, okay? So there you go. It kind of limits that. But here's the thing. Offensive line was the issue the whole year, in my opinion. And when Frank Ragnow retired, I don't care what you say, what you thought, whatever the case might be. We knew that there was going to be a potential. Well, obviously there was going to be a step back in the offensive line. How big of a step back, we didn't know. How did Christian Mahogany develop? How did Tate Ratledge look in his first year? And I thought Tate Ratledge had a good year. Graham Glasgow, I thought he had a good year. The problem was Will had not a great year in his expectations. He even said it himself. And Decker said the same thing.
Did you say sorry to cut you out there? Did you just say Sewell?
Yeah.
Yeah, I did think it was funny that which I mean, I agree with maybe from his standards, but like PFF put out, he was like the protector of the year, and like I do think he has a legitimate chance to win that. But that was maybe my favorite quote from the entire locker room cleanout was like you would have thought Sewell had like a horrendous, like he was so disappointed in himself, and he was like genuinely pointing out like, yeah, like, I'm supposed to make plays that other offensive linemen can't, and like I just didn't do it. Which again, we can agree with that, but like he still had, like he was like the second highest graded player in all of the NFL by PFF this year. So I just thought that was kind of funny that he had that, which is what you want your franchise guy to have. Like that's exactly what you want him to say, and he feels that way.
I was just about to say that, like all your leaders. You look at St. Brown. You look at Goff. You look at Sewell. I mean, Hutchinson, right? Jack Campbell, guys like that. They'll tell you, yeah, I wasn't the best. I really wasn't, and they have a high expectation of themselves. So when Sewell says, "I did not have a good year," Tate Ratledge goes, "Damn, I did not have a good year either." And then Decker is saying it. It goes down the line. Yeah. The leadership starts at the top, and I thought what Sewell said was interesting from his standards because he has a standard that he did not meet in his opinion, and there's things that he could have done. I thought he had a great year, but there were some games where he looked a little bit like he was limping and gimpy or whatever, but it is what it is. But the offensive line was the issue this year. That's what it was. And one of my questions coming into the season was the interior offensive line and play calling, and it came to a roost that both things were true, and that's a huge problem.
It is. Let me ask you this, because this is I totally agree with you. If we would have just played out this whole season where we don't really know the scores of what's going on, we just kind of know like what the chatter is, and we know the offensive line is like not really performing that great, and like they had a mid-season offensive coordinator change. Like wouldn't you probably say like we probably ranked like probably 10 to 15 in scoring, like somewhere in there, like maybe worse, like might have been a full disaster. Like we fired our offensive coordinator. Like it is amazing that we still like that our offense is that good that we still ranked like almost first in scoring for the entire season. It is
And that
kind of remarkable.
and that's why if I was Dan Campbell, I could sell his offense to anybody. I can
Exactly.
go get
Yeah.
any offensive coordinator I want because the reality situation is, look at we didn't have a great year. We
Yeah.
offensive line was an
Exactly.
issue,
Couldn't run the
offensive play
ball as
calling was an
consistently.
issue, and you still finished third in yards per play, points per game. You dropped the fifth, so you're still were a top 5 team. You know, just you were a good offense. You just couldn't put it together on a consistent basis, and part of that was the offensive play calling. Part of that was your offensive line, and I think that those things will be fixed in this offseason. So that's the major thing I look at with those two things. And if you would have told me at the beginning of the year both things were true, and then you told me my biggest strength of the Lions defense was the secondary, that's why I said the secondary was the biggest strength for the Detroit Lions. And you said Branch gets hurt, Joseph gets hurt, Arnold gets hurt, I would have told you maybe we're a 7-win team. Maybe we're a 6-win team. So maybe they outperformed themselves maybe by 2 wins because of everything that happened. And then you take away Sam Laporta. It's like, okay, all those things happening. I mean, for you to be without Sam Laporta for the last 8 games and still finish top 5 in the NFL in points per game, pretty damn good. Offensive line sucked pretty, and you're still top 5. This is offense that just needs an offensive line and an offensive play caller, and I think that they're going to get both. So that's my opinion. And Brett Holmes said it himself. He said it in the press conference that they're going to go look for a center. We talked about it last week on the show. Tyler Linderbaum, Connor McGovern, Cade Mays. There's opportunities out there to get better at center. You're never going to get a Frank Ragnow. It just doesn't happen very often. I mean, there's, what do you want to say, 27 other teams that are looking for a Frank Ragnow. You got Creed Humphrey, Cam Jurgens in Philadelphia, maybe. But there's not many centers like Frank Ragnow. So just get that, out of your head. So that's what I look at. And I don't think that, like you said, if you would have told me before the season offensive play calling and interior offensive line would have been the issue and they would have been major issues, I'd have been like, yeah, we'll be 15th or maybe, bottom of the chili pot. But they were still top 5. So everyone says that, oh, Ben Johnson made this team. No, I think Frank Ragnow leaving was bigger than Ben Johnson. That's my opinion.
I think that for sure is played out, and it's for me. It's hard to argue just with ultimately the offensive scoring and then how disjointed the offensive line looked at times, and it wasn't even it was the frustrating part about it is you still had that capability to score what they did. A big part of their offensive struggles this year were the red zone. They weren't they were almost automatic in the red zone last year. They weren't this year. That's one thing that you could maybe point to play calling, but it's also a thing that they were able to run the ball in the red zone like incredibly efficient last year, and they weren't this year. And in those tight spaces, you probably can point to the interior of the offensive line not being as strong to get kind of that tough yardage at the end of the field. So, yeah, I mean, it was unfortunately it did pan out to where they had to fill both coordinators. I do think they're going to keep Calvin Shepard. And I'm fine with that, but to the point of he did have to have some learning moments this year. It wasn't perfect. I think he did have some really good game plans. I think there were honestly probably a good amount of games that were probably a player or two away from being great, and that's ultimately not good enough. But I think that could be more so on execution as it was the coach not having any idea what he was doing, leading the team into the game. But there were growing pains from a play calling standpoint on both sides, and but I think certainly not having if we would have had Frank Ragnow this year, or Ben Johnson but not Frank Ragnow, I think there still would have been some very serious issues and inconsistencies with this offense as they kind of transition into a new era of their offensive line.
Ben Johnson left at the right time. That's the way I look at it. Holmes also said in the press conference he wants to replenish the defensive line. We talked before the show about this in terms of what this means, in terms of what did he mean by this, and we kind of went into it a little bit. But um, what would replenish the defensive line look like to you? What does it mean to you?
Honestly, it's been a lot of. I feel like I had this conversation a couple of years ago as well, where their approach is they're not really committing long term to a bunch of guys. I know they committed obviously long term to Aiden and McNeil. Outside of that, it is basically trying to find good fits year to year. And a couple of years ago, it was Isaiah Buggs and Jones. I'm forgetting his first name. Big number 90, I think it was, and the defensive tackle, and O'Connor and Kaminsky and all the you had Houston his rookie year, and you were kind of just you tried to patch it together, and that's what they have tried to do this year too, and it didn't really work. They had Al-Quadin Muhammad, who was very productive. Everyone else really wasn't. And now in terms of replenishing the defensive line, you're probably not going to have DJ Reader, who was a starter. You're probably not going to have Davenport, who was the slated starter coming into the year. And now it would probably more be Al-Quadin Muhammad, who is a free agent. And as we talked about last week, he is going to have a market now. There are going to be teams interested in him. So you are going to have to minimum re-sign him, or if you lose him to free agency, now you basically are, essentially re-signing your entire defensive line rotation, because you're probably not going to have Pascal back. You're probably not going to have Anzarike back. So, I mean, that's, 4 or 5 spots right there, 2 of them to starters coming into this year. So, as I talked about earlier in the show, I think if I had to just pick one position right here, right now for the first round pick, I would hope it's a defensive lineman and probably an edge. If I had to be more specific on the defensive line. So, retooling it means, taking an edge in the first round, re-signing Al-Quadin Muhammad, and then making probably 2 free agent signings, probably nothing insane, but 2 guys that I think can be way better than what Marcus Davenport was the last couple of years, and better than, just the total gamble that someone like Pascal stays healthy or someone like Anzarike stays healthy. So, there's going to be, available spots on this roster. So, I mean, they're going to have to, it's going to look much different, I would assume.
Here's the problem. A lot of people want to get like this name that's on the block, and obviously Trey Hendrickson is the name, but you'll have to pay $25.4 million at least to get him. So that stands a little bit in the way. But you mentioned Al-Quadin Muhammad, keeping him. His market value right now is $8.2 million, which is not bad when you think about this defensive end class. Because when we're talking about Arden Keegan, 13 million, who Arden Key is a little bit sporadic, right? Joseph Asai could get 15.1. Even a guy like Kwity Paye, who I don't think is the greatest player. I mean, he does have some stats, but he could get 17.1 on the open market, okay? You're looking at Joey Bosa, who could potentially get 13.7 million, and Buffalo's time to pressure was worse than Detroit's time to pressure. So stick that in your pipe and smoke it. The reality of the situation is when you look at all the edge rushers that are available in free agency, you're going to kind of have to look at how you could build this team out. And I look at 2 names in particular, but they're older. Khalil Mack, 35. He'll turn 35 pretty soon. Danico Autry, who we could have got a couple years ago, he's 35. So do you really want him? You look at a guy like Dante Fowler. He's 31. He's a speedy guy. He might be a good depth piece, as a pass rusher.
Is
But
Jalen Phillips a free agent? What is his projection? His is probably pretty decent. Probably
I'm looking at
relevant.
Jalen Phillips. Let me see where he is.
Might be wrong, but I thought he was a free agent after this year.
He is not a free agent. It doesn't say it on this list.
Okay.
Sport Track. Yeah. Aziz Ojulari, who we could have got in a trade. People were marking him the trade. Um, he's going to be a free agent. Hassan Reddick, who is 31, is going to be a free agent for 5.5 million. So maybe that would make
I'd
sense.
take him as part of the rotation.
Kingsley and Bargray from Green Bay could get 5.9. So
he's actually interesting too. He's not bad at all. Actually,
he's 25, so it's right in the range. I mean,
and the Packers definitely have interest in re-signing him, but it's not just something where they can automate. It's kind of like the Al-Quddin Muhammad thing, where I'm sure in an ideal world they'd like to get him. So yeah, that's definitely a name for a rotational piece that I'd be.
So there's a guy. Those are a couple guys you can go. I mean, Gross Matos, who is from San Francisco. He's projected at where is he projected? You don't have a projection, but he would made 9 million. He's 27 years old, so maybe you can go there.
There's
But
enough guys here where if they took someone in the first round, re-signed Al-Quddin Muhammad, and then let's just say they got like Hassan, like they're not going to re-sign DJ. Like let's just say they don't re-sign DJ Reader and Alex Anzalone, which is like close to $20 million. But I mean, DJ Reader was making what, like 12 to 14 million this year or something like that?
He was making 11 million, which was high.
And Anzalone was making what, 6-7 million, something like that.
Yeah.
So I mean, if you have around 20 million, you can get Hassan Reddick, and this is just totally hypothetical, but Hassan Reddick and Arden Key for $18 million. Maybe it's Hassan Reddick re-signing Al-Quddin Muhammad and one other guy for $5 or $6 million, and then you're drafting an edge in the first round. That could be a gargantuan upgrade, and maybe it's you only get one of those guys in free agency or something. But I mean, point being, or maybe you trade for someone. But I mean, there's options. You're going to have all these roster spots available on the defensive line. So for me, there's really no excuse. I mean, you got to do better than hitting on Al-Quddin Muhammad and everyone else getting injured or not doing anything. So I mean, there's pathways there to get significantly more production than they got this year.
And look, a guy like Roy Lopez, right? He's projected at 6.3 million in his thing, and he would be the seventh interior defensive lineman in projection. So he would probably be a guy I would look at potentially.
And honestly, for all the slack Brad Holmes kind of gets in free agency, he's pretty good in those like under 10 million, for sure under 5 million type signings. I mean, even just this year, like Roy Lopez, Rock Yassin, Avante Maddox, like he finds guys in that range. So that's why I'm like, go out and take like 3 $5 million swings at edge. Like I feel like he could hit on 2 of them, and then you re-sign Al-Quddin Muhammad and get a first rounder. Like I just feel like don't do like I don't know what is honestly. It was pretty dumb to just go with like Marcus Davenport and like Anzarike and Pascal this year. So just chalk it up as an L and go out and hit on a couple guys in free agency and draft someone decent. And it's a significantly better rotation than this year. Because the other point that I haven't brought up here, but I brought up a lot online, is I still don't really think it's great. It's incredible that he's able to do it, but Aiden Hutchinson playing, I think, 91% of the snaps this year really is not that sustainable. And he would be better if he was playing 75% of the snaps. Like literally everyone, other than him and Max Crosby, like literally everyone else plays like in the 70s. So
and it's not sustainable.
Yeah, it's not sustainable. And like if you had a real rotation, you might even get a better version of Aiden Hutchinson and risk like 15% less snaps of him. So I just feel like it's like you can actually have a real rotation for once. It could be a big, not just, 1 or 2. And I get it. They had 2 guys this year that were incredibly productive off the edge. Like say what you want, like Hutchinson and Al-Quddin Muhammad. I agree. That was quite an incredible tandem that basically everyone would have taken. The only downside is it kind of is a wash when almost every single one else didn't really do anything or was hurt. So
Yeah,
you got to get more production there.
it kind of goes when your best guy is like a Tyrus Wheat. We got a problem.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
they didn't do enough to address the depth of the edge position. I think replenishing the defensive line means we actually get able bodies in there. That's what I interpret it as, because I look at this team and I go, Levi Enrique, Davenport, I mean, Davenport came back and he still looked like junk, which
Right.
was surprising, to be honest. Josh Pascal has never stayed healthy in his entire life. So the fact that you thought you were going to get most out of this was the guys that you were bringing back. I mean, you were bringing back pretty much guys who could potentially, I don't know how you want to say it, that could potentially just be hurt. So
yeah, it really was a flawed thinking, honestly. Like it was too much, especially when Pascal was already locked in, and then you made the decision to bring back both Davenport and Anzarike, and
Yeah.
there wasn't like, just if you're switch out one of Davenport or Anzarike for another Roy Lopez. Roy Lopez was a guy that the first thing that I pointed out when he was signed was, wow, when you look at his stats, he plays like basically 14 games was like he had a huge injury plagued year. It was basically like 16, 17 games every year, and it wasn't some big flashy, incredible, eye-popping stats, but it was, wow, okay, I can pencil him in for 16 to 17 games, and he's going to be a guy that I'm totally fine with putting out on the field. And it even ended up being better than that. So I just think put more of your eggs in that basket as opposed to, oh my God, if Marcus Davenport doesn't get hurt and it's like 2019, then maybe he can get like 7 sacks. And it's just that really, to me, if you're talking about looking inwards, as Brad Holmes said today, if you just take out the injury history moves and take out the project picks in the middle rounds of the draft, and not everyone is going to work still, but just take out some of that extra risk and get a little bit, because he's proven, as I've talked about this has been a big point with me with Brad Holmes, is look at all these incredible things he's done in the second, third, and fourth rounds of the draft. Like from guys that weren't project picks. Like he thought St. Brown was a steal. He thought Derek Barnes was worth picking. He thought Kirby Joseph was going to be good. He thought Aleem McNeil was going to be good. Like all these guys were non-first, second round picks. Like go out and get more guys like that, and go out and get more Roy Lopez types.
Even a Rodrigo.
Build actual real depth and have guys that you're not just hoping stay healthy. And then even if they do, we don't really know what we're getting. Like, so I think that approach could be altered this year when you come to free agency in the draft.
And people are bringing up Hassanin. Here's what I will say to that. I don't care about Hassanin from this angle because you cannot rely on him, number one. And if he does turn out to be a good player, okay, if he does turn out to be a good player in year 2, there's no person on planet Earth, none. There's not even one person in football that would say this. We have too many pass rushers. There's no person
he would just be a totally dirt cheap, great piece to have if that ends up happening.
And that would be great.
It wouldn't be someone that we're relying on as someone that didn't even play this year.
It would be an upgrade over what you had, in terms of the depth and everything. So depth is important. I think depth in the edge department is more important than flash, in my opinion, because if it doesn't matter how you slice it, like you can go get Trey Hendrickson tomorrow and you could still be in the same situation where you're relying on 2 guys to play most of the snaps, which is not ideal. It's just not ideal. Like, I don't care what kind of line you're thinking. I mean, you could put the contracts into the future, but the reality of the situation is you need depth. And the reason that the Eagles won a Super Bowl with their defensive line was depth. They had depth at the defensive line position, at the defensive tackle, defensive end, and they had edge rushers, and they had linebackers who could blitz and get to the quarterback. That's how you win a Super Bowl. So that's what the Eagles did. And that's kind of a similar thing that I would think that Brad Holmes has to do with this roster in terms of what he's trying to do. So there you go. That's what I think.
Yeah, and that is to the point of where Brad Holmes said today, like he's going to stick to his approach, which again, I don't think is that bad. I just want, a bunch of bites at the apple. He needs to execute that plan way better going into this offseason. Put your eggs in different baskets than Marcus Davenport and Levi Onwuzurike and Josh Pascal.
And that brings us to our last segment, which is we'll get to the positional breakdowns next week because we had a full show this week. But the Lions free agency, okay? Who stays, who goes? Lions free agency, who should stay? I'll give you the free agents. These are your free agents. I mean, Anzalone is one of them. Obviously Roy Lopez, Avante Maddox, Al-Quadin Muhammad, Meek Robertson, Rodrigo, Rock Ya-Sin, Dan Skipper, Daniel Thomas. There's a lot of guys to choose from. I mean, who would you choose from in your opinion?
The guys that stand out to me out of that list would be, right here. Roy Lopez for sure. I want back. I don't think even at that $6 million projection, which I think you could maybe even get him a tick less than that, but I definitely want Roy Lopez back. And then two guys that I don't think again are going to cost a crazy amount and were really productive this year. Rock Ya-Sin and Avante Maddox, especially with the uncertainties. I don't think Amik Robertson's going to be back. I wouldn't hate it, especially I think they would sign him with the idea if he's going to be the nickel and like that's where you wanted him to be originally. But I like Avante Maddox and what Rock Ya-Sin did this year. And then I'd love to bring back Al-Quadin Muhammad, and I think he's probably even worth the price tag, especially just because as we just talked about, none of what they else did this offseason worked. So that's the one guy that did. In a perfect world, I'd like to bring him back. If he costs too much, I'd understand it because he did have a double-digit sack season this year. But I like those two guys. And then I also think Khalif Raymond, even though I kind of bashed him on some of his decisions on the punt return, I don't think, he's a vet. He's 31 years old. I don't think he's going to break the bank. And I just think he's another guy that, in a year, you always need wide receivers. You can trust them. He still kind of had a sneaky productive year as a wide receiver, just in terms of he's so far beaten off the path in terms of an option when you weigh in the wide receivers, Laporta, the running game. For him to give you really anything is a boost. And you can get, he's a guy that I'm not, in terms of a negotiation, if you're really going to leverage it and want all this extra money or whatever, okay, no thanks. But I just view it that as a guy that he might just take whatever we offer him, and just as another reliable guy, I'm fine with bringing him back as a fourth wide receiver or whatever it would be.
Yeah. So here's the ones I go with. I was looking at the market values of all the Detroit free agents. You got DJ Reader who's valued at 3.8. I mean,
really, he's only valued. I'd bring DJ Reader probably back at $3.8 million.
Yeah, that's not bad. It's not a bad price range. Meek Robertson, he takes a little bit of a pay cut. He's $4.6 million this year. He'd be $4 million just flat. Roy Lopez will get a $3 million, bump up in pay, and Al-Quadin Muhammad would get a sizable one, like a $7 million bump up in pay. But I kind of look at Al-Quadin Muhammad as one guy that I would keep. Right, I think Al-Quadin Muhammad really would be a great guy to keep. You mentioned Khalif Raymond. I'm not
dying on the hill of it, but it's just I view it as like if you can basically get him for nothing, he's just a reliable guy that probably would be reasonably productive for his role.
Yeah, so I would go with Avante Maddox too. So I go Muhammad, Maddox. I would bring back, depending on the right deal, like if he wants to be here or not. Maybe I would bring back a guy like Rodrigo. But Roy Lopez, obviously. So there's three. Rodrigo would depend on how he's how he wants to come. If he wants to compete or whatever. Amik Robertson would be a guy I'd potentially bring back as a slot corner because I really think he was put out to dry with how he was used as an outside corner. I think that could have been way better. And then I look at a guy like Daniel Thomas, who is really good, or Rock Ya-Sin. I really don't have a really big read on the safeties. There's some safeties that I like in this free agency class, Like I was looking at LA, Cameron Curl could be a safety that is a free agent, and he doesn't really have a market value next to him. There's some guys that are safeties like Andrew Wingard from Jacksonville, Nick Cross from Indianapolis, MJ Stewart from Houston. Like there's guys available that you can go get. So I'm not really worried about the safety position. But when you look at some of these guys like Rodrigo and Roy Lopez, like are they going to be the same way? And it depends on who they who they want to, what do they want to do? Like does Rodrigo want to go compete for a starting job? Maybe he could do it with Anzalone gone. Maybe you bring back Alex Anzalone. I don't know. It depends on the right deal. Like I'm not going to pay Alex Anzalone, what, $7 million, $8 million. I'm definitely not paying him over 8. That's just the way it goes. So
Yeah, I kind of view him as someone that won't be back.
yeah, I kind of view that the same way. So it's difficult to say what you want to say, but I think that if you had to pick, I think Muhammad, especially with that defensive end class that they have, I really don't think it's that great. I would definitely bring him back, especially if you want to stack the position. Probably have to bring him back, in my opinion, because unless you go for the big fish like Trey Hendrickson, which that don't make much sense from the Detroit Lions angle, anyways, it's probably smart to bring him back. And Roy Lopez, I bring him back, and for the price tag you mentioned it, DJ Reader, I think that would be good. But Khalif Raymond, like I think Dominic Lovett could be the potential replacement for him. Even Tom Kennedy could be a potential replacement for Khalif Raymond. And I like Khalif, but if if he resigns for what he was making, I mean, no, I can't do it. Like I just can't. So
Give him
that's
a
just
huge pay cut.
yeah. So you'd have to take a huge pay cut to kind of stick with the team, to be honest. But I just look at it, man. Like they paid Levi Enrique $4 million. That was a waste. They paid Davenport $2 million. That was a waste. They paid Pascal $2 million. That was a waste. I look at it as that could be the replacement for Pascal and Davenport. Maybe you use that.
They paid Reader a lot last year, and then they paid Anzalone probably a fair market value, but that's another chunk too. So I mean, they're going to have, and I really think there's going to be, and I'm not a cap guru whatsoever, but a lot of people think there's going to be some restructures of contracts. The cap's also going to go up again. So they're going to have some room to be able to do stuff. And as Brad Holmes said, I don't think they view it as like they need to upscale the whole roster. I think they just by looking at it, they have a lot of spots on the defensive line they're going to be open to be able to replace. And I think they would like to upgrade the offensive line a little bit. Beyond that, things might get a little tricky in the secondary depending on the injury situations and how fast people recover. Is there a clear replacement for Anzalone? Not really, although, they do play a lot of linebackers, so maybe they just, they can tweak their system a little bit more and put another DB out there. Maybe they just devalue that position a little bit. I don't know, but there definitely are some questions outside of the offensive and defensive lines. But I think for the most part, those are really going to be what most people are going to be interested in terms of the new names and any potential upgrades on those spots. And maybe linebacker is a position where, I haven't done too big a deep dives in the mock drafts, but I know there's some interesting names at linebacker that could potentially be available. So, as guys that can kind of duel as as you were talking about with the Eagles, of guys that are linebackers but are also pass rushers and also have some versatility in coverage. That position can be a really, really important one. And you see guys even as listed as linebackers, but are really just kind of elite edge rushers. So, maybe that's a position I kind of talked about going into this year. I'd like to see the Lions use their linebackers in more creative ways. And I think, honestly, they accomplished that goal way better than I thought they were going to. I mean, Jack Campbell was kind of all over the place this year, more than just concentrating on stopping the run. He had, I think, 5 sacks. Even Derek Barnes, who had a down year, was able to pick up some sacks, and Alex Anzalone ultimately had a good year. So I think the linebacker position is one that they value, but it is also one that they could get more creative if it's, okay, let's just put more on Jack Campbell's plate and we can use the money a little bit differently if we don't want to bring back Alex Anzalone.
You mentioned the cap. This is the most interesting stat about the cap that people don't understand, okay? Going into 2026, do you know who is going to have the most cap space with all the contracts Detroit has? All the contracts. Do you know who has the most cap space
In the entire NFL?
in the NFC North?
Oh, well, I know it's not the Vikings, right?
They're negative 30 million.
Yeah, okay. It's not the Vikings. I mean, the Packers have a really young roster, but they did just sign Mike.
They're negative 4.74 million.
Okay. So yeah, not them. It's the Lions.
It's Lions. They're
Okay.
13.4 million, and they're going to clear some cap space. But like you look at the top 50, the top 51 or whatever they call it. Even they're right there, but like Green Bay, they're minus 4 million. Minnesota's minus 30 million. They're gonna have to make some things. It's just not a good situation for the rest of the teams. And I look at it like this, the Lions are gonna have 13 million. That's 21st in the NFL, like lower. Eagles are at 22. Their dead cap is insane. But
oh yeah, the Eagles are cap tied.
You look at half the teams in the league, and it's like, okay, which teams can get really better in the NFC? The Rams have a lot of cap space. The Seattle Seahawks got a lot of cap space. The 49ers got a lot of cap space. This is kind of where Brad Holmes learned this from. So they're going to open up some cash. They can restructure a lot. And the way it's going to work is like a guy like, Jared Goff, his cap hit's going to be 65 million. Yeah, they're going to take that down a little bit to 15%, which would make it probably around 50 million or whatever the case may be. So again, they're going to get those guys, and they're going to be able to do what they need to do in order to open up cap space. But I was looking at the Sport Track article about the financials, and they said, obviously there's options for Jahmyr Gibbs and Jack Campbell.
That's going to be a very interesting part of the offseason, what they ultimately do with the extensions, because you got to figure they're going to do at least one or two of them. And I kind of think that the injuries might play a part in it. And Brad Holmes even said as such today. So, with like Laporta and Branch, and obviously I think they want to extend Campbell. That's probably one that they'll prioritize. Gibbs as well. So that's, especially with how the Lions have operated here, that's the kind of priority and the focus that they want to do. So where they ultimately give some of these extensions, I think is always a very interesting part of the offseason.
So Sport Track has this article about the financials. Here's how the potential cap conversions could work. His number is 69.6 million, Jared Goff. A simple salary conversion plus 2 void years can open up as much as $42 million of space. Amon-Ra St. Brown, if is already fully guaranteed, converting into a bonus plus 2 void years frees up $21.5 million.
Mike Bisner is who I guess we should maybe even bring up because he got interviewed by the Falcons. But I know he's like a massive cap guy for the Lions. I feel like they definitely were like, okay, we're going to sign all these guys to deals early. And part of that is going to be we're going to get years to where it hasn't kicked in yet. And I think that part of it's been a little underrated. Like the JMO deal doesn't even kick in yet, and he already had a top 10 season for receiving yards. But I also think they factored in like, yep, we're going to restructure like X, Y, and Z's contract. And now that you're reading this off, it is going to be fascinating to me to see how that plays out.
Whoa. I'm not done. Elaine McNeil, if you wanted to do something with his,
please,
you can open up $18 million of cap space. Penei Sewell's salary is fully guaranteed. A simple salary conversion can free up $15 million of space.
Oh my gosh.
And DJ Reed's 2026 salary is fully guaranteed. So a simple salary conversion can free up to $11 million. So if you add it up,
That's how the
42
cap is. Like the cap basically isn't real to a degree. If you're smart and like this is you just read off like like oh my god, like what we can like let's F it, let's trade for Miles Garrett and just restructure like 2 deals and like we're set.
Yeah. And if Taylor Decker retires before March 15th, deal holds at 9.4 of dead cap. Dead cap against a 20 point. It depends on how they structure it or whatever, how it gets done, but that's how it goes. So there's a lot that can be done, and obviously the money can be freed up, but you're in the best situation in the NFC North. So that's what I would look at. So when you look at the free
Only have
agents,
the easiest schedule in the NFC North by far.
this is all doable in the future, right now and into the future. So this is going to be a good spot for Detroit, and this is going to be a good spot for us. But obviously, we'll be doing. I think we're going to figure out when we're going to do episodes. We might take a week off here and figure out. Maybe we might do Mondays as the permanent, like what we're going to do, just so it gets a full week of whatever. But that is how it's going to go. But we'll do more of the positional breakdowns. Me and James, we're gonna do the positional breakdowns, kind of going into the. That way, we have a full understanding of what we're gonna do in free agency and the draft. We can kind of figure out where we're gonna go, and that way we can kind of build this thing and kind of like make sure that people know what the reality of the situation is. So, and they even mentioned in this article, if you really want to know, you could open up cap space with Brock Wright, Terrion Arnold as a trade candidate, Dave Montgomery as a trade candidate. So, and Brad Holmes spoke to that today. We didn't get to it, but we'll get to it on we'll post about it and everything. But yeah, this has been a great podcast, and we'll see you guys in the next one as we talk more Detroit Lions football. James is along for the ride, so go subscribe to our YouTube channel. We'll promote it more. We got 8 subscribers today, and we didn't even post nothing yet. So it's gonna be fun to have this, and then as we go, we're gonna kind of figure out what we're gonna do going forward in terms of what positions we want to go for first. Obviously, quarterback doesn't really matter to us because Jared Goff's gonna be here for the foreseeable future. But maybe we do something with the quarterback and the running back room and wide receiver kind of jumbled together. And then we could do offensive line and defensive line and so forth. That way we kind of get through the whole thing. And we'll talk NFL too. We'll talk playoffs as soon as that's over. But I mean, not over, but like we'll talk playoffs too. So all that here, more on the Detroit Lions News podcast. So subscribe, rate, review, wherever you get your podcast. You just go to Apple, Spotify, Amazon, Spotify. There's some weird podcasting apps. We're on there too. We'll be on Odyssey too, which is 97.1 tickets. So stay tuned for that. And then, yeah, this will be a good one. So thanks for watching. Thanks for listening if you're on the podcast. And we'll see you guys in the next podcast. We talk more Detroit Lions football.